Well, to me, she is somebody who's been championing Indian cinema for years and years now. Documentary filmmaker, author extraordinaire, Nasreen Munni Kabir. And at the fringes of the Jaipur Literature Festival, it's wonderful to catch up with her. Hi, anybody who's connects with me from London or the United Kingdom, I always ask them whether they're safe and healthy. I mean, with this whole second wave. How are
Yes,
you?
hi, Rishi. I'm fine, actually. Basically, it's almost like, you just can't go out anywhere, you can't do much, so you're safe in that way. But life is becoming monotonous in many ways because every day kind of melts into the other, and you get the feeling this is like what's that, Groundhog Day, where it's the same thing happening again and again. You wake up and your main activity is eating your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then figuring out what the hell can you watch tonight on Netflix or Amazon or BBC or Channel 4 or whoever. So that's the routine. But thankfully, one has a bit of work, so one tries to get on with it. But it is very tough to find meaning in life when you are disconnected from routine.
True that, true that. And in the midst of that, you must have enjoyed your session at the Jaipur Literature Festival. Sahil Ludhianvi, A Life in Poetry, coming as it does, for those of you who are living under a rock, coming as it does on the back of In the Year of Sahir 2021, The Diary by Nasreen Munni Kabir, which is currently in all on-ground as well as online stores. I don't know how many of you can go to on-ground stores, but online definitely. So you must have enjoyed that chat, and I hope Saif Mahmood brought out the best in you.
Yes, Saif is a really interesting mix of being extremely witty, and at the drop of a hat, he can recite reams of poetry. So, I mean, it's a lively session with him. And what you find, just like when I'm talking to you, I can hear, there's some people who have very good voices. The voice quality itself is very important when you're being moderated. Like you have it's a radio voice and it's a very soothing voice. And Saif has a very energizing voice. So it's like having a conversation on steroids.
Thank you very much for the compliment. And Nasreen, the book itself, I mean, I know that you've written about Guru Dutt, you've made, audio visuals, used that format to talk about your love for all these great legendary movies that Guru Dutt Saab made. Was the relationship, and I always say this about film personalities and writers and us, it's always a relationship, even if, they passed away before our time. Was that relationship with Sahir something that started with Pyasa?
Well, actually, it started mainly with my sister who used to love Hindi Urdu film songs. And as we were growing up in England, when you are growing up in England and of Indian origin, what are your main connections? It's the food, sometimes it could be religion. And it used to be also going to the movies on Sundays, and it was a big event in those days. It was no question of having anything on TV or video or VHS or streaming. And you went to the movies, and it was community activity. And what did you take home? You took home the records, you took home the music. And I honestly believe that film music is really the glue that actually binds us to Indian cinema. And so before Pyasa, when I used to hear these songs, I am not saying that Majru Saab or Shailendra ji or, Shakil Badayuni are any less. But there was something about Sahir's work which was very touching. And I think it was because even his love songs have a touch of melancholy. And, Rishi, we all like to be sad. So, if you are feeling low or romantically problems in your life, you'll go to a sad song. You're not going to go to something too joyful.
True that. And you've got an interesting mix of people talking about or reliving their memories of Sahir Saab. I mean, from Lata Mangeshkar to somebody like a Shankar Mahadevan. And how did you go about this? I mean, one is to say whoever's available, but you've reached that stature in life where you don't have to worry about that. It's for us lesser journalists saying, quotable court, whoever's available, chalo le lete. You can actually go and spend time and pick who you want to go after, and then more often than not have them say yes to you. So talk to me about that.
A very perceptive comment you just made, because people on the outside don't realize actually how choices are made, whether it's interviewers or whether it's books or whatever. How are these choices made? I would say what I wanted to do was to have a mix of the old and the new. People who worked with him, people who knew him, and people who loved him and who were affected by him. And I wanted as possibly people from the industry. You'll also have comments by academics, because it's like seeing Sahir through a kaleidoscope, and you've got to see every angle to see why he has an impact. Shankar Mahadevan's actual commentary was beautiful, because he looked at Abhi Na Jao Chhodkar from the point of view of what it would be like to sing that song. And he talked about road bumps and how the tongue gets stuck on certain words. And while he spoke about Sahir's words flowing like a river. Now that's a beautiful imagery, and only a singer could get that, whereas somebody else would have an academic thought, and a lyricist would think of it in terms of language and structure. So subtly you try and have anecdote with insight, and if you get that mix, you've got something good.
Yeah, and it's almost like, they say 3 degrees of separation or 6 degrees of separation. I know that you've done a book of conversations with Gulzar Saab, and apparently, Gulzar Saab and Sahir were literally neighbors.
Yes, really.
Tell our audience about that.
Yes, you see, when Gulzar Saab came to Bombay in the early 50s, he was renting a room and sharing it with 2 other people, one room in somewhere, in Versova, and it was called Kuva Lodge, and it was a house. I don't know if it belonged to Krishan Chandra. I mean, these are names we're just saying lightly, but these are kind of icons of Hindi Urdu literature and film and so on. And anyway, so Gulzar Saab was living in this room, and Sahir Saab had rented the first floor of Krishan Chandra's house, and so he used to see him. But as he very humbly says, Gulzar Saab says, Sahir was already a big man, and Gulzar Saab was just young and new and so on, and he couldn't sit him down and start talking to him like chums. And so there was a great deal of respect. But actually you can see that it was a very kind of a nurturing time. And being in the presence of people like Sahir Saab or Krishan Chandra must have been a great boon to the younger generation of writers.
Yeah, and it's nice that you've gotten some of the newer breed. Kausar Munir, for example. Kausar and Irshad are 2 lyric writers in modern day Bollywood who turn around and say, I don't know why people think we're old, because the Urdu Zuban is such that one thinks of, people who are slightly older who would take to it. And these are young, vibrant, really cool, modern day people. So nice of you to go out there and get Kausar to give you something.
Yes, because actually you wanted to find out what the lyricists of today think. And it is not very often you find a woman writing song lyrics. So Kausar Munir was a natural choice. She's also a friend, but beyond being a friend, she's a natural choice because she comes from an Urdu tradition, and she also is working in today's cinema, where the song, we must say, she is not number one priority. It's no longer the main thing of a film.
And just digressing from the Sahir book, I mean, one can learn so much from you as a broadcaster, because, it's one thing having conversations with people like Javed Saab and Shah Rukh Khan, because you don't have to speak much. They can just take over the conversation. But, when you're dealing with somebody like an A.R. Rahman, or sometimes, you've never done that with Ajay Devgan, but I'm just talking from my experience. And when you get sometimes these monosyllable answers, yeah, okay, there's that. With Rahman, of course, it's gotten a little better over the years.
Yeah, definitely.
Then how do you approach it? It's almost as though I'm asking you for advice. How do you fill in the gaps?
Well, when I did that conversation book with A.R. Rahman, it was some years ago, and it is true, he does have a tendency of keeping it very brief. But the question really is time. And unfortunately, on the radio, or you're meeting deadlines, and your time, you can't phone up Rahman every week for 3 years. When it came to the conversation, I kind of tracked him down and we talked on Skype over 3 years. And to be very honest, sometimes I would ask him the same question, and then each time he gave me one sentence, I added all these sentences together for the same answer. So it is a kind of a manipulation, but it is his true voice. But it is time that was on my side. It was time. And also I had I would say a friendship. He's a man of great integrity. And when he was working on Bombay Dreams, I was making a documentary for BBC on Bombay Dreams. So we met many, many times in London and so on. And I'd say I have a lot of respect for him. And eventually it all worked out. And I had done many years ago a documentary on Bismillah Khan. And really, Rahman loved it and even presented it and persuaded Sony Music to release it as a DVD. But it was Rahman's respect for the tradition of classical music that I could see. And he has respect for things that are quite pure and the real thing, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I really get what you mean, which actually segues very beautifully to my next question. I mean, one is, the writers and the movie stars and the musicians, Bismillah Khan Saab, Zakir Bhai, the charmer, but such an intelligent human being. I mean, to do books on these people and then do what you did with Bombay Dreams, which is, back in the day, it was huge, wasn't it? I mean, here is Shekhar, A.R. Rahman, all these people taking over the West End stage, as it were, taking India to the West much before all this diversity and inclusion happened.
Yes.
And musicians, classical or otherwise, as subjects, you must find them fascinating.
Well, actually, when it came to Bombay Dreams, it was produced by Andrew Lloyd Webber, who has a long tradition and a big name in musicals. So it was a very interesting experience to see him at work with Rahman. And I'd say, as far as the musicians, classical musicians, film musicians, slightly different, but classical musicians, I was definitely nervous when I approached Zakir Saab, and I had done this through two friends of his, Shumantra Ghoshal and Aisha Sayani. They introduced me to Zakir, and I was very nervous to even ask him because he knew my work was in cinema, not in classical music. But he said it very beautifully. He said, so if I agree to the book, it will be a leap of faith. I said yes, and I gave him my books with Lata ji and with Rahman and Gulzar Saab, Javed Saab and so on. So he could see at what level we would be discussing, and he was very generous. And in a funny way, when I interviewed him, I realized the questions you can ask him, he's so articulate, is the questions of someone who is not familiar with classical music can ask. And in a way that allowed the door to open to people who were not experts in the field, and that I think worked in my favor.
Have there been instances where after you've done the book or after you've done the series, you've cultivated a wonderful friendship? I mean, you look at Vahida ji, she's so beautiful in every which way. Can you say you're friends with her now today?
Well, to be honest, you feel a little humble to say friends, but definitely. And whenever I'm in Bombay, she invites me over and she immediately asks her servant to bring me nimbu pani because that was the tradition. While we did our book, I'd have nimbu pani and we'd sit and talk. And she's a very gracious lady. They've all been very, very gracious to me, and I have to be very grateful to them for being so respectful. Because we're not equals. I have not achieved what they have achieved, but somehow I think they like the work, and when they like the work, they show the respect.
Yeah, there is an understated beauty to everything that you do, Nasreen. I mean, as an admirer of your work, I have to say that. And I do remember when the Shah Rukh Khan piece came out, The Inner and Outer World of SRK, it exploded. I think that was the biggest in terms of fame or popularity of all the work that you've done. Yes. And you've done some really pretty fabulous stuff. And, it just suddenly exploded. It was world famous and things like that. And you can still go on to YouTube and find clips and this and that. Were you prepared for that kind of hysteria and love that project got for you?
I would say something that actually it will show how old I am, my dear Hrishi. But the fact is, I did a similar film with Mr. Bachchan in 1989. All followed that star. And you saw that same adulation and so on. But by the time Shah Rukh became number one, to be very honest, the audience and his fan base had become even more international and even greater. And it was the early 2000s where there was a kind of an explosion of interest in Hindi cinema. So when he went on tour, there were unbelievable quantity of fans and so on. And it was an amazing experience. And when I must tell you something, when I showed Shah Rukh the film, I don't know if he even watched the whole thing, to be honest. I don't know if he had the patience, but he said something quite moving. And he said, well, I'll keep this and one day I'll watch it and say, that was my life in year 2004. And I thought that was a very moving comment, because he was, I mean, he's still loved. He has, you know, there's stars who go beyond the success of their last film.
Yeah.
They become what they call iconic. Iconic is used a little too lightly today, but it's only when time makes you iconic. And a love for you that is almost divorced from the work and what you do, that is someone who's iconic. And it has, as you started this interview with the very, very important thing about how you have to have a relationship with the subject, and his fans have a relationship with Shah Rukh, and that's very, very rare, actually. And that's why you might have many, many actors and stars, but you don't have these iconic people.
That's very beautifully put. And, you know, at the other end of the spectrum, you know, there are the shy folks, which is Rahman Saab, A.R. Rahman. And at the other end of the spectrum, there's somebody like Mr. Bachchan, who sometimes you feel has created a wall. You know, he will only let you know as much as he wants you to know.
Yes.
And did you have some trouble penetrating that, if I can ask you that?
I wish you could see that documentary, because there's a very important difference. It was done in 1989. And Mr. Bachchan was born in 42. So how old does that make him? 89 and 42, 47? No, can't be 47. Yeah. He was about that age. And the big difference then in 89 and now is that various differences, but he was working with his peer group. He was not on set with somebody who thought he was a god. There was Manmohan Desai, he used to constantly make fun of him, and there used to constant banter going on. Prakash Mehra, who was quieter, he had his own way. Ramesh Sippy, these were all people who were his peer group. Now, if you have your own peer group, you're not going to be the king on the set.
Yeah.
But today he has gained such a status because very few people have the longevity that he has, so that you find the industry treats him differently, his fans treat him differently, and he has given so many interviews since. There's so many more channels and radio, and more than radio, satellite. Then there's a blog, then his Facebook, then his Twitter. So you actually have somebody who's constantly in touch with the world, but on his terms. Whereas earlier days, you could kind of suggest another way of looking at life. And he would respond, because, I mean, Manmohan Desai said something wonderful. He said sometimes he come on set and sometimes he's very warm, he blows hot and he blows cold. And when he's blowing cold, we just leave him alone.
Wonderful. So, like they ask in Old Blighty, wherefore from here, Nasreen Munni Kabir? What are you working on now? You know, you're ageless, timeless. It's wonderful, and you know, good for us who are fans of your work. So, what's next on the anvil?
You see, what happened is I did 2 books with Javed Saab. One was called Talking Films and Talking Songs, and they were specifically about those subjects. Sure. Now I was very keen, and he was talking about doing an autobiography at some point, and he won't, because of time and because of, I don't know, being very preoccupied. So we decided, let's do a 3rd book. So it's a trilogy, and it will be called Talking Life. And in that, we will concentrate on his life story, about his upbringing, his background, his relationships, early days in Bombay, his life. And not so much analysis about films or songs, because that's been done. We just have to be careful not to repeat ourselves. And because Javed Saab is such a brilliant man, and the last book I did was in 2002, and that's already 18 years or something has gone by. So, and his, you say 10 or 15 years, when you meet the same person, you find a new take. And if they're growing as a personality and as an intellect, you will find they have a slightly new, the camera has shifted slightly and panned in a different direction. And sometimes if you can mark these times, you get a very interesting graph of the person's growth.
Yeah, and conversations with him, even otherwise, even if it wasn't professional, are amazing, isn't it? I mean, I remember the latest one being about music copyrights and things like that. He's very much into that these days. And also in between, he will talk about his Jewish society and how he needs to organize stuff there.
Yes, yes.
Never a dull moment.
He's never a dull moment, and he's very witty. He's very. I've never met someone so. I never met someone so witty and so analytical. You can get him to look at a scene in a film or a book or anything, and he will analyze it and get to the core of the subject, and that's rare.
Such a wonderful conversation with you. Thank you very much for your time and your patience, and keep giving us joy with your work. And I hope you and your family stay safe and healthy. Thank you very much,
so
Nasreen.
much. Pleasure talking to you, and good luck in everything you do.
Thank you very much.